said, that hat looks like it belongs on a job. So I went to the guy and I looked at it, I picked it up, and I looked at it, and guess what? It was a real cheapie. I go, I'm sorry, my friend wouldn't be interested in this. He says, why not? I says, if it's not worth $400, I don't think he'd put it on his head. And he started laughing. He says, did you bring 400? I says, no, I was hoping I'd get it for 30.
I think this one was around $200.
I need to. I really do. I need to get on Facebook.
Okay, we're live.
That guy's not on, huh?
We're live. This can go on, I think. There, now it's on.
Is it even open?
I think they lose them because when they're puppies, they're real sharp and pointy, and then they fall out and they get these real big. So I think they lose teeth just like people. I might be wrong. And bigger, right? Not bigger. But I'm not an expert on dogs, so if I'm wrong, try not to lead people astray.
We're already almost there.
I think you guys would like to find out right now. If I have to wait, they may not be available for a long ride.
You know, they say that you're going to take it out of her anyway.
Can you imagine going to work with an AK or an AR?
They do that in Israel. Everybody knows.
I know.
It's like, no, I feel safe here.
I mean, as good as Arizona is, it's still not like this.
So I'm going to get it.
I take care of that one.
Well, I can't take it outside, but I can. But I want to keep it in my car so that if something happens to work, I will never keep this one in my car because if it gets stolen, I have nothing. So it's hiding in my house. So, and I went to Sportsman's Warehouse the other day on my way to work, and I'm looking around trying to see prices and stuff, and the guy goes, "Get behind the green line, blah blah blah," and I'm like, "What?" And there's like 5 or 6 other guys, and they were down here, and I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" I'm just looking. It's like, "Get behind the green line." I'm like, "Oh," it's like, and the guys they felt sorry for me. The customers are just looking at me going, and I'm like,
He was not nice about it.
no, but I'm sure he was probably getting trounced all morning. Having issues all morning. He was saying this and that, you know, guys. Because this was at like 10:30 in the morning, and there was already like 5 or 6 guys standing there waiting. So they're probably grumpy from just everybody coming in. You know, what do you mean you don't have any ammo? What do you mean you don't have this? What do you mean you don't have that? You know, are you kidding me? $500 for that?
Go in there.
Like,
Okay, go in there. Go in there.
Just so I know how much you're looking to spend if I see something that fits your bill.
yeah, I need something that I can, like,
No, how much money do I get?
at this point, I don't want to spend more than a couple $100. It doesn't need to be.
Okay, if I see something, let's see.
Yeah.
And it has to be 22?
I need something that doesn't have a lot of recoil, and I need something that I can just, like, do this.
But they're
You
not
know, like
allowed
my, have it in a chair. So, you know, I don't want to. That's when I had
I had to make it delivered.
Hey, Liv.
Well, I think it's anybody.
Go ahead and get started again here in about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna restart. Should have brought my little ram's horn. You get a light flashing right, and if you got 30 seconds to cross the line, otherwise it's up. Hey, you can be grateful she's not in charge of the assembly. Talk about shock collars.
Nate actually keeps me in mind. Yeah.
Read this in an area.
Well, that's good. Good to have orders. You got to ask Mama. She's in there, laying down. Let's wait till later.
Right here, okay?
All right, we about ready? Let's see what we're doing here.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
It's really hard to push off on it.
Okay.
Are you on it?
No, I'm waiting for. I'm holding the door. You all done?
All right, we ready? Ready as ever?
Ready.
All right.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Oh. Is your husband coming? I'm all funny.
All right, guys, we're gonna learn a little bit. A lot of this is a lot of shadow pictures of Yahshua in this, like an immense amount of shadow pictures of Yahshua in this. So we're gonna go over some of them. We're gonna go over some of the meanings of some of the words that we got going on here. So if you notice, this Torah portion is called Huchot, right? And I put a KH in there. I figured that would be a little bit better because we don't have an English pronunciation for KH. And for centuries, most translators actually put the CH in there. And we do have a pronunciation for that, and that gets everybody all messed up, right? This is the first letter there. First letter is a chet. It actually has a guttural back of the throat sound, chet, right? So it's a chukat. That's why I put that one there. And if you'll look at some of these other ones that say they got the CH in there, and you'll hear people go, "What's chuka?" You know, it's not chuka. It's chuka. There's a real interesting phrase I saw here in the beginning, which is, "This is a law of the Torah," right? Which Yahweh has commanded. So here it is in Hebrew, completely in Hebrew, in the Hebrew Old Testament. It's Zot Chot, which is a feminine plural, HaTorah, so a statute or law of the Torah. So the definition of Chukat means custom or manner, ordinance, or statute, right? Statute for the cleansing. The root here is Koch. Some people have these last names. I know somebody locally who has the last name Koch, right? It's probably Jewish. Don't maybe they do or don't know it, right? But it is an enactment or a commandment, custom, decree, law, ordinance. Very similar. And Torah, which is a precept, statute, especially the Decalogue or the Pentateuch. I don't know if you guys have heard that before. How many's heard that? But Decalogue is the 10 Commandments, and the Pentateuch is the 5 books of Moses. It is also called Torah. We'll do that right here. So the root of Torah is the word Yarah. Properly to flow as water or to throw, especially as an arrow, to shoot, to point out, aiming a finger, to teach, direct, instruct. So you'll hear some of the teachers online. They'll say the Torah is teachings and instructions, right? This is why. This is what it means in the Strong's. We also so my whole point when that is a lot of times we hear this whole missing the mark. We're getting ready to go over that, right? What is sin, right? Missing the mark. This is true. And you get it from this whole idea of shooting. But a lot of times they don't tell you what you should be aiming for, like if you're missing the mark, right? Sin is missing the mark. What should I be shooting at, right? So sin, right? Sin is this Genesis 4:7 is the first place I found sin, and it is it not if you do good that you are accepted, and if you do not do good, towards the door is sin. He is lying towards you, and his desire, and you must rule over him. So this is when Yahweh is talking to Cain when he's contemplating murdering Abel. And if you notice in here, there's actually a lot in this, and I didn't realize it until I started looking at it. I was mostly just looking for the first definition of sin. And if you do good, you are to be accepted. Well, if you do obedience to Yahweh, you will be accepted, right? If you don't, then sin is crouching at the door, right? It's lying. And the thing that was interesting to me is that sin is personified here. He is lying towards you, and his desire is for you, and you must rule over him. But the word in Hebrew is chata. It's another chet word. It's not chata. It's chata. And it is an offense, sometimes habitual sinfulness. It is a penalty occasion. We have the sin sacrifice, but in this sense, it is an offense. So one can sin against another. A person can sin against another person. That is to make an offense against another person. So the root here is also the same word. It's just a little different vowel pointing on it here. It's chata. To miss, to incur guilt, to forfeit, as in to forfeit some of the promises that were meant for you. To miss the goal or path of right duty. And then down here you see this, and this is Brown Driver Briggs is actually the Jewish. They're the ones that have come up with it's the Jewish basically version of Strong's, and they're the ones that put this in here because this really isn't in the Strong's, but it is in the Brown Driver Briggs. So they're the ones who brought out that this is to miss the mark. And like I said, they don't ever really tell. A lot of people don't tell you what hitting the mark is. So we're going to go through the biblical definition right here, and here's one of the allusions that I saw to the biblical definition is from the prophet Samuel when he's talking to the king Saul when he did not obey Yahweh's voice and kill all of the Amalekites and the sovereign Agag. Samuel says, "Does Yahweh delight in ascending offerings or slaughterings as in obeying the voice of Yahweh? Look, to obey is better than slaughtering. To heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as sin of divination, and stubbornness is as wickedness and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of Yahweh, he does reject you as sovereign." Kind of goes back to what was said in Genesis there about being obedient and following his ways. So in 1 John here, he doesn't play any games, doesn't pull any punches, right? He says, "For everyone doing sin also does lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness." In many different translations, it says iniquity, but in the Greek, it's anomia, and that is lawlessness. There's no way around it. Everyone 1 John 3:6, everyone staying in him does not sin. Everyone sinning has neither seen him nor known him. So there are people who are telling you that they know the Messiah and then they continue in the ways of lawlessness, basically. They don't really know the Messiah. They don't know who they're talking about. Kind of like we read earlier with the woman at the well. He says to the woman, you don't know who you serve. We know who we serve, right? This is exactly the situation for many people. False messiahs. So Matthew 24:11 states that many false prophets shall rise up and lead many astray, and because of the increase in lawlessness, the love of many shall become cold. For false messiahs and false prophets shall arise, and they shall show great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the chosen ones. The reason a lot of people are led astray is because for thousands of years, we were having this discussion earlier, thousands of years people are leading people astray. They're leading people away, saying that the Messiah came to do away with the Torah, to relieve you of this burden of keeping the law. But the law is not burdensome, right? It was there for your protection. It's because he loved you. So the test of these prophets that come, or these teachers, right? When there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, he shall give you a sign or a wonder. The sign or wonder shall come true, even if it comes true, of which he has spoken to you, saying, let us go after other mighty ones which you have not known, and serve them. Do not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer of dreams, for Yahweh, your Elohim, is trying you to know whether you love Yahweh, your Elohim, with all your heart and with all your being. Walk after Yahweh, your Elohim, and fear him, and guard, that is to shamar, his commands, and obey his voice, and to serve him and cling to him. So, as we can see, Yeshua was alluding to this here when he said that they shall show signs and wonders. There are so many people who have shown signs and wonders, and there's no way that they could have orchestrated some of these things when everybody's in a room and they got their eyes closed and a guy swings his coat across the room and everybody drops in unison. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to believe it with their eyes closed that they fell. There is a spirit acting in there, but it's not a clean spirit. It's not the Ruach HaKodesh. There are other spirits, Paul says, to test those spirits, right? Because you might have a spirit, and a lot of people might think it's holy, but it might not be holy. So the test is, so when it says, let us go after other mighty ones, an example would be when the children of Israel were at the base of the mountain while Moses was on the mountain, and they made the golden calf, and they said, this is the Elohim that led you out of the wilderness. Tomorrow is a feast to Yahweh. It's a different Elohim. Up on the mountain, down below, they said it's Yahweh. Up on the mountain, Yahweh was saying that they're serving another God. So the red heifer. So in Numbers 2, this is one of those commandments where it doesn't make sense until thousands of years later. So in Numbers 19:2, it says, this is the law of the Torah, which Yahweh has commanded, saying, speak to the children of Israel, that they bring you a red heifer, a perfect one, in which there is no blemish, and on which no yoke has ever come. Numbers 19:3, you shall give it to Eleazar, and he shall bring it outside the camp and shall slay it before him. And we skip ahead a little bit here to 19:19, and says that a clean one shall sprinkle the unclean, and on the third day and on the seventh day, this is talking about in the ordinances for people who are been defiled for the dead. On the third day and on the seventh day, he shall cleanse himself. So on the third day, someone will sprinkle him, but on the seventh day, he shall cleanse himself, wash his garments, and bathe in water, and shall be clean in the evening. But the man who is unclean does not cleanse himself, that being shall be cut off. The word is karath, from among the assembly, and that is the chahal. And that word goes, the reason I put that in there is that goes back to ecclesia, which ended up being called the church. So there was a church in the Old Testament, as opposed to what some pastors will tell you is that there was no church in the Old Testament, but there was one right here, right? Chahal. Because he has defiled the set-apart place of Yahweh, for the water of cleanness has not been sprinkled on him. So if you try to come in, the only place you can get that water of cleanness is you have to have somebody go and get it for you and bring it and sprinkle it on you. And then on the seventh day, you wash yourself, and then you're free to come into the set apart place. Otherwise, you're defiling it. Go ahead.
I have a question. Would that also involve?
Yeah, they.
Kill someone, you have to be unclean. You have to be clean.
Yes. Yeah, there were instances, and I can think of an instance. I don't remember the verse though. They talked about how they went out to battle and they had to be set apart for 7 days because they'd went out, because they're slaughtering, and they went to war a lot. Yeah, and they plundered the dead. So there was processes for cleaning things that they got from the enemies and all that too. Mm-hmm.
How would they do that?
Huh?
How would they do that?
What's that?
Set apart.
There's probably a procession that happened, I imagine, yeah. So those kinds of things aren't given directly in the scriptures, but we know that this is the process for you to have the uncleanness removed from you is to have the ashes of the red heifer were set aside, and then they got mixed into water, and then they would sprinkle it on them. So I could imagine that either he went out to them, or they came up and something along those lines, and then on the seventh day they'd be clean, right? So I found this interesting commentary when I was looking for this about why the red heifer was chosen, and it says that the heifer was appointed for sacrifice in opposition to Egyptian superstition, which held these sacred and worshipped their goddess Isis under this form, and this appears more likely because males only were chosen for sacrifice. So Herodotus says they sacrificed males, both old and young, but it is not lawful for them to offer females. This is the religion pagan practice. So they were slaughtering red bulls to their deities. It was also to be a red heifer because the Egyptians sacrificed bulls to the evil demon Typhon. It was also to be without spot, having no mixture of color. Plutarch says that the Egyptians sacrificed bulls and select them with such scrupulous attention that if the animal had a single black or white hair, they reckon it. I can't read that Greek word there. A thuton, unfit to be sacrificed. Right? It's defiled. Is what they considered it. A single hair. That's how strict they were about their beliefs, and their gods were false gods, and they're not like Yahweh. So without blemish on whichever yoke never came. So and that having to be that they're common, something that could not be a common use. So the purpose, if you caught it in there when we read through the portion with the dead, because we get the red heifer, and then that tells us why we need the red heifer. Had to do with the dead, right? So it was cleansing from defilement, so that you could draw near the set apart place, so that the set apart place was not defiled. So here we're going to tie that to Mashiach. So in Titus it says, talking about Messiah here, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness, to cleanse for himself a people, his own possession, ardent for good works. So Yahshua gave himself directly for us for the purpose of cleansing from lawlessness. In Matthew 3:12 it says, his winnowing fork is in his hand, and he shall thoroughly cleanse his threshing floor and gather his wheat into his storehouse, but the chaff he shall burn with unquenchable fire. So that there brought me straight to the parable of the wheat and the tares, right? So the tares were those who were his, and the wheat was those who were his. Sorry about that. And the tares were those who were those to be plucked out of the world, right? And so the red heifer had to be unblemished. How much more shall the blood of Messiah, who through everlasting Spirit offered himself unblemished to Elohim, to cleanse your conscience from dead work to serve the living Elohim. So Mashiach filled this, the picture of the red heifer for your cleansing. The other part that I didn't get into with this one is that he was also taken outside the camp. If you remember, the priest had to take him outside the camp, and he was slaughtered outside the camp. Well, Yeshua went out to Golgotha, or the Hill of the Skull, right? And he was impaled there. Temple of the living God. Okay, so it was for the purpose of so you could come into the temple. As I put a little bit more in here because it has a lot to say about how we should be with unbelievers. Do not become unevenly yoked with unbelievers, for what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness, and what fellowship has light with darkness? What agreement has Messiah with Belial, or what part does a believer have with an unbeliever? And what union has the dwelling place of Elohim with idols? For you are a dwelling place. That arrow got moved. I'm sorry. It's supposed to point to the A. Dwelling place of the living Elohim. As Elohim has said, I shall dwell in them and walk among them, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. If you go through, I went through many different translations on this, and they're split down the middle as to you are the temple, you are the dwelling place, or the temple, or you are a dwelling place. So there's a huge split there, and when I try to look at it in the Greek, which I'm not an expert in Greek, it kind of look like there's just nothing there. It just says, for you, dwelling place of the Most High. So it's not as clear as it might seem to be in English. Therefore, come out from among them. Be separate, says Yahweh. Do not touch what is unclean, and I shall receive you. And I shall be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says Yahweh the Almighty. So he's still, this is Paul talking here. He's still interested in your cleanliness, and Yeshua is your path to cleansing. So the temple. This is a continuation of that same portion. Having then these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from defilement of flesh and spirit, perfecting set apartness in fear and Elohim. So like on the seventh day, you come and you cleanse yourself. Anything you want to say?
This was the first was in the previous slides.
It's second Corinthians here, 6:14 through 7:1. If I'm going too fast, you have questions. If I say a word you don't understand, anything like that, stop me. Okay.
I'll just make a comment.
Sure.
When I was first started and first got saved, I was wanting to be institutionalized church.
Uh-huh.
It was always you're dead to the law, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm so frustrated when I'm trying to tell Christian friends of mine about Torah, and they're like, "Well, we're dead to the law, brother." I'm like, "Really? What law are you really dead to, brother? You're dead to sin and death.
Sin and death, yeah.
It's not God's law.
Yeah.
So you really should go back and look at that."
Yeah.
And then what you referenced earlier, I never heard one time any pastor, any clergy that sin was lawlessness. Not one time did I ever hear that. So
right.
My suggestion would be to always bring that up.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, when you're talking to a Christian who's maybe getting curious about Torah.
Yeah.
Because that's going to immediately have him hopefully think, like, wait a minute, sin is lawlessness?
Yeah.
I've never heard this before. I heard it was missing the mark.
Yeah.
And so when I first read that in John, I was like, man, if I would have heard that,
right.
I would have been really starting to question, like, well, what law are you talking about? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's, anyway, I just want to bring that up.
Ah, blessed be his name. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, the word tells us that law is a schoolman, violence.
Yeah. But Mashiach is the author, right? He's the author of it from the get-go, and that gets missed a lot too, right? They try to split him down the middle and say, well, the old meaner Old Testament God, and the new loving, the new loving hippie, let you do whatever God is in the New Testament, right? You can do whatever you want. So they get a split down the middle when he's not split down the middle, because he turns right back into the same deity when we get to the end of the book, right? When the pillars of fire and smoke and the blood up to the bridles of the horse, right? Sounds just like what happened in the beginning, right?
Well, even when he was here, he didn't just overturn the tables. He whipped the money changers.
He whipped them. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Wouldn't some of us like to whip the money changers?
Right. Right. Right.
And all they were doing was exchanging straight across the board. There was no profit being made, but all they were doing was selling the sacrifices for the temple. But people will say, well, there's no profit in what I'm doing. I'm just selling something that is for religious purposes as a means for, but Yeshua did not see it that way. Because this temple doesn't belong to you. It belongs to my Father.
Right.
You're defiling it.
Understand, this temple too did not have the ark in it. I do not believe the Shekinah ever dwelt in that ark, in that place. Only in the form of Yahshua HaMashiach himself when he came into it, right? That's the only time that the Spirit, can't say that, but it wasn't like the tabernacle and the first temple that was built by Solomon. The ways of the temple. I know a lot of people have a hard time with the ways of the temple, the blood sacrifice and bringing grain and offerings and stuff like that. But we're going to look here at Revelation 21:3. It says, and we're going to compare different translations as well. I heard a loud voice from the heavens saying, see, the booth of Elohim is with men. He shall dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and Elohim himself shall be with them and be their Elohim. And then we're going to look at this. So I didn't put the reference down there. I thought I did, but maybe I didn't save it. But the bottom one is the King James. I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle, with the word is skine there, of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. We're going to look at what skine means. Skine means a tent or a cloth hut. Literally or figuratively, it's a habitation or a tabernacle. So we get confused because sometimes these translations don't do justice. It says, I saw no dwelling place in it, for Yahweh El Shaddai is its dwelling place, and the Lamb. But if you look at that in Revelation 22, it says, I saw no temple, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple. So, but right here it just said that there's in the exact same chapter, it says skine, his tent is going to be in their midst, right? The booth or tabernacle, and he will dwell with them. He's going to dwell in his tent in the midst of them. So the word there, if you look at it, the word was skine for the tent, and this one here is neos. It's a different word. It's not the same. It's a totally different word, and neos is a shrine or temple. The word neo, which is the root word, it means a holy place, but this is more towards a temple. So there will be tabernacle service. The original service was given in the wilderness in the tabernacle, and they did it in the wilderness. That will be returned to, so that you can draw near to the holy place. So anyways, we're going to talk about false teachers because Yeshua was talking about false teachers. And this is in one is before our reading and one was part of our HafTorah portion. Those who sit among the burial sites and spend the night in secret places, who eat the flesh of pigs and the broth of unclean meats in their pots. Well, those who follow Yahweh don't do that kind of stuff, right? Those of faith. And then apart from our Parasha, our HafTorah is, for look, Yahweh comes with fire and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his displeasure with burning, his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire by fire and by his sword, Yahweh shall judge all flesh, and the slain of Yahweh shall be many. Those who set themselves apart and cleanse themselves at the gardens, after one in the midst, eating the flesh of pigs and the abomination of the mouse, are snatched away together, declares Yahweh. Well, that snatched away to me sounded like wheat and tares, right? It says that the tares will be plucked out, right? Yahweh's people don't eat these abominations. So people that try to lead you to do these things, they're obviously not from. They're not sent by his spirit. They're sent by another spirit. So there's a place kind of pretty looking, like a garden in the midst of tombs, right? Here's another one where the tombs are in the midst of the garden, or in the midst of the holy place, right? Or their so-called temple, so their sanctuary, right? That's defilement. This is the defilement this whole parasha is about, right? The defilement that we need to be cleansed of. So if you were to walk on that, according to Torah, you would be unclean, right? So, and in the same, they turn around and say, this is the house of God, but the dead are there, right?
And the symbolism.
Yeah. Yeah, I think King Solomon said something about that, didn't he? Where he talked about how the foolish woman sits in the gates and says, come into my house, but the dead are there, right? So Isaiah 66 continues to say, and I, because of their works, people who do these things, right? And their imaginations, am coming together, and all nations and all tongues, they shall come and see my esteem. And I shall set a sign among them, and I shall send some of those who escape to the nations, Tarshish, Lud, this is part of we read it today, who draw the bow, Tubal, Yawin, the coastlands who are far off, who have not heard my report nor seen my esteem. And they shall declare my esteem among the nations. That sounds like everywhere that isn't Israel, right? And they shall bring all your brothers as offering to Yahweh out of all of the nations on horses and chariots and litters and mules and camels, my set-apart mountain in Jerusalem declares Yahweh. As the children of Israel bring an offering in a clean vessel into the house of Yahweh. So when we're gathered together, we'll be bringing clean offerings in clean vessels, right? This is the future. I have to pause a second. As we continue on here. I included a lot of this Parasha reading, actually. Sorry. And from them too I shall take priests for Levites, declares Yahweh. For as the new heavens and the new earth I make stand before me, declares Yahweh, so your seed and your name shall stand. And it shall be that from new moon to new moon and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, declares Yahweh. And they shall go forth and look upon the corpses of the men who have transgressed me, for their worms shall not die, and their fire shall not be quenched. They shall be repulsive to all flesh. Kind of sounds like these people who are disobedient going to be hanging out for a while in a pretty nasty state. So Yahweh never commanded a temple to be built. That came from the heart of King David. When Messiah returns, a system of offerings will draw near as well, or they will to draw near will return as well.
Well, that's also a pretty good verse. When we're coming into the Torah, I read that all flesh will come to worship me. New moon.
The Sabbath to Sabbath?
Yeah, and my wife and I were like, what does this mean? Like, this isn't saying Sunday, or it's not saying, I mean, this was a very good verse to convict us.
Mm-hmm.
And if you show it again to a Christian, like, okay, can you explain this? And most of them are like, no.
Right.
Because this is the future also.
Yeah. Yeah, this is in the millennial kingdom, right?
Yes, exactly. So I'm like, okay, explain this to us.
Right.
If we're not to observe Torah, then in Isaiah 66, it says it right there.
Right.
It makes them think.
Right.
So anyway.
Well, it's true too. Another thing, and it's not in here, but when it comes down, you got those 12 gates, right? Those 12 gates have the names of the sons of Jacob on them. It doesn't say anywhere above those gates Baptist. Doesn't say Catholic.
No.
Doesn't say Gentile. There's no Gentile gate.
There's only one nation.
One nation. Yes, Israel. That's it. One family, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. So that's what you're grafted into.
Right.
You're grafted into being family, not,
Well, because of dispensationalism, you got, the church, which is supposed to be separate from Israel and the Gentiles. It's like, no, there's just two. Gentiles and Israel, that's it.
Yeah.
But again, when you're in the church, you don't understand that.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Stan.
Told me first came to Arizona, back to one bride.
Thank you.
Yeah. The leech has 2 daughters. Give, yeah. Okay. So drawing near, right? That's also what the red heifer was about. I shall sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean from all your filthiness, and from your idols I shall cleanse you. That reminds me of Hosea, right? I shall give you a new heart and put a new spirit, or ruach, in you. And I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I shall give you a new heart, a heart of flesh. This is what we're looking for, right? And I shall put my spirit, ruach, within you, and I shall cause you to walk in my laws and guard my right rulings and shall do them. It didn't. The Ruach HaKodesh. This is why you got to test the spirits, because if a spirit came to you and told you to not follow the Torah, that spirit's a false spirit, because his spirit tells you to follow his Torah, right?
And almost every spirit in the church says that. Oh, you're a legalist. Oh, I've heard some people say you're an anti-Christ spirit. I'm like, whoa.
We'll talk. We're gonna talk about that in a second. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So here in Hebrews, he also says, "Let us draw near with a true heart of completeness on belief, having our hearts sprinkled in that clean water, right, from a wicked conscience, and our bodies washed in with clean water." Sorry. So we're going to talk about a ruach here. It is wind, right? A lot of people, I don't know if anybody has studied this, so I'm just giving it to those who haven't. It means wind or resemblance of breath, like gave you the breath of life, right? The Ruach HaKodesh, breath of life. And figuratively life right here. And down here it says mind. And I thought this was kind of interesting because Paul tells you to guard your thoughts, right? Take every thought captive, right? Yeah. So these things sometimes that are happening in your mind, they're not yours. They're something else. They're another spirit, right? You hear Mashiach say, you don't know what spirit you are of. So this is out of the 1828 now. The 1828 this is a gigantic definition, so feel free to go read all of it. I just kind of cherry-picked some pertinent parts out of there, but at least I let you know where I got it from. So it means to breathe or blow. It means life. It means intellect, genius, or wit, which is another way for like thinking. Of mind, temper, state of mind, right? So a lot of things are happening in your mind. Sometimes these are from spirits. Spiritual things are happening. Okay, so now we finally made to chapter 20, where Miriam dies at the beginning and Aharon dies at the end. So this is interesting. Numbers 21, the children of Israel, all the congregation came into the wilderness of Sin in the first new moon, and the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died and was buried there. Then 33:38 says, Then Aharon the priest went up to the Mount Hor at the mouth of Yahweh and died there in the 40th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Mitzrayim on the first day of the 5th new moon. So she died in the first month, he died in the 5th month. So Miriam, I had to look at her name because I was watching some teachings on some of this, and it's interesting that her name means basically bitterness and rebellion. And she incited a rebellion against her brother Moses in Numbers chapter 12. And it is the root of a lot of words in this. A lot of the places are named that have this mar. So the first part there you see over here, H4805, it has a yod at the end. It's mimresh, and then it has a yod at the end, mari. But the mar, a lot of times, if it has that in there, it means bitterness. And so, like Naomi said, she came back and she said, call me Martha. Don't call me Naomi, call me Martha, because Yahweh, the hand of Yahweh has gone out against me, and it has been very bitter. So here's another root from that is marah, which also means bitter, disobedient, rebellious, and to provoke. The waters of Meribah. And the people contended with Moshe and spoke, saying, if only we had died when our brothers had died before Yahweh. We've heard this before, right? Mm-hmm. Why have you brought up the assembly of Yahweh into the wilderness, that we and our livestock should die here? Moses, why did you take God's people out of the land, that land flowing with milk and honey, and bring them out here to die? You did that, Moses. We know you and Aaron did this, right? So this is kind of the same thing. It happens again. They kind of try to make a separation between Moses and Yahweh. And Moses is like, I just did what you told me to do, Father. Right? And they keep blaming me. Right?
Just kill me.
Just kill me. Kill me. So he says to take the rod and assemble the congregation, and you and your brother Aharon, and you shall speak to the rock before their eyes, and it shall give its water. And you shall bring water for them out of the rock and give to drink to the congregation before their livestock. So he says to speak to this rock. So you can see possibly where Aaron and Moses had some issues here. Miriam just died. Yeah, right? Aaron's not dead yet. Miriam's dead. And so he's probably a little distraught. And then when you get a bunch of grumblers come up against you when you're very emotionally distraught, when you're talking, these people are in their hundreds. Moses is 120 years old right now. So Miriam is older than that. She might be closer to 130 years old because she was old enough to put him in an ark when they were little, right? Mm-hmm. So she was quite a bit older, I think, right? Aaron's only 3 years older, but Miriam's a bit older than that. And so his sister was there to watch out for him for decades now, right? So she's dead, and I'm sure he's in pain. Things to consider. And then you got grumblers. Understandably grumbling because when you're in a desert where it's hot and there's nothing to eat, nothing grows, they just didn't handle it well. These things, lessons that we need to learn when we're put under high pressure is that to remember that, hey, people who are trying to teach you or lead you or whatever, they're doing their best, and they may not do everything perfect. And sometimes Yahweh does that for a purpose. Sometimes you go through harsh situations because Yahweh is trying to test you. So, things to consider. And Moshe and Aaron assembled the assembly before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels." That has to do with Miriam's name right there. Shall we bring water from this rock? Then Moshe lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and much water came out, and the congregation and their livestock drank. But if you remember, the first time he was told to strike the rock, this time he was told to speak to the rock. Right? So in a state of upset, he maybe went back to the old ways, right? But Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aharon, because you did not believe me to set me apart in the eyes of the children. Therefore you do not bring this assembly into the land which I had given them. These were the waters of Meribah, because the children of Israel contended with Yahweh, and he was set apart among them. So he went ahead and did it. So sometimes Yahweh will go ahead and do something even though you have angered him deeply, because the people were in need. People needed water because they were about to die, and Moshe was the one that was supposed to do it. Moshe didn't do his job right, but Yahweh still answered and gave water. He'll take care of you. So what is so important about the rock? So Corinthians 10:4, 1 Corinthians 10:4. And all drank of that spiritual drink, so they all drank of the spiritual rock that followed, and the rock was Messiah. And I found an interesting parallel here on Chabad.org. Now, they're talking about the midrash, but I am not endorsing this as scripture in any way, but it's just an interesting parallel, because other places in there, they say things that are like, what? How'd you get that? But this one I just thought was an interesting parallel. It says, according to the midrash, the well was actually a rock shaped like a sieve. It would roll with them throughout their travels, and when they stopped, the rock would dig deep into the sand. The leaders of the tribe would come and stand by it, saying, "Rise up, O well," and it would rise up. And some other commentators explain that the rock itself didn't actually roll with them, but rather the stream of water that originated from the rock would spring up in their new location. So it's just kind of interesting how in Jewish teachings that they don't accept Messiah at all, they have some similarities in there. So my personal opinion, it's just my opinion, I don't know whether this is true or not, but I think that they got some good stuff from somewhere, but then when they got exiled into other places, that maybe some other things got kind of mixed in with it. So they still held on to a remnant of what was good, but maybe had additions or ad libs, or like a comic book, I can write that story better, So I think we've kind of suffered that throughout a lot of people throughout our generations. So Meribah, just to show you again, Meribah has that same root, means to quarrel, just like Miriam's name. And there's like two words here mashed together in the word Meribah. So you got this word rib, which means to grapple, complain, contend. You go up here you could see them both. The pointer up there. Yeah, okay. So you can see the Mari is from here to here, and then the Resh Yod Beit is right there. So it's these two things put together, kind of complement each other in their contending and being bitter and causing strife, right? So did they try Messiah? Or do they try Messiah? Do we try Messiah? Neither let us try Messiah, as some of them also tried and were destroyed by serpents. But wait a minute, the serpents happened in the wilderness. Messiah came thousands of years later, right? Neither grumble, as some of them grumbled and were destroyed by the destroyer. Huh. Well, Messiah wasn't in the wilderness, was he?
Yeah.
Was, huh? Let's see what. So Moshe, it says, by belief, Moshe, having become great, refused to be called the son of the daughter of Pharaoh, rather choosing to be afflicted with the people of Elohim than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a time, deeming the reproach of Messiah greater riches than the treasures of Mitzrayim, where he was looking to the reward. By belief, he left Mitzrayim, not fearing the wrath of the sovereign, for he was steadfast, seeing him who is invisible. So it's saying that Moshe heard the reproach of Messiah, right? Moshe heard it. And the people tried the Messiah, and Messiah sent serpents to destroy them. Fire, yeah. Or that is like an idiom for poisonous. They were adders. So in Isaiah, he says, for Yahweh spoke thus to me with a strong hand and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people, saying, do not say a conspiracy concerning all that this people call a conspiracy, nor be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. Yahweh of hosts, him you shall set apart. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. So we don't need to worry about what's going on in the world, because I'll tell you right now, if you look back to what was happening in Mitzrayim, they are out to get you. Okay, we don't have to be like Chicken Little. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. They are out to get you. They were out to get the children of Israel in Egypt, right? But who showed his hand, great and mighty? Yahweh, right? So just remember that. We need to take this to heart, and myself included. I need to be faithful. And he shall be set apart, be for a set apart place, but a stone of stumbling and a rock that makes for falling to both houses of Israel, as a trap and as a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. That's pretty interesting. You could use that one for your friend, both houses of Israel. And many among them shall stumble and fall and be broken and snared and taken. Bind up the witness and seal the Torah among my taught ones. So the witness is also an idiom for the tablets of witness, right? Which were set inside the ark. It's called the Ark of Witness, right? It's also the Torah, be bound up. So chapter 21 here. Yisrael, talking about the Arad. I didn't talk about the people of. I didn't talk about Edomites, but Arad here. Then Israel made a vow to Yahweh and said, if you deliver this people into my hand, I shall put their cities under the ban. And Yahweh listened to their voice, and Israel gave up the Canaanites and put them and their cities under the ban. So the name of the place was called Hormah. So we can see here that when they're destroying these cities completely, they're actually taking all the goods and stuff like that. Instead of keeping the plunder for themselves, this is getting either given over to religious service or complete destruction. It's like an offering. So if we look over here, the word there for it, 2763 is haram, and you can see here is to devote to religious uses, to make a curse, to destroy, to devote, to forfeit. So they have said that we will not take profit from this victory, this battle that we're going to have. If you will just give us victory over these people, we will give everything over to you and your priests, or just destroy it completely. So it's not because of any kind of bloodline defiling or anything like that. So we got grumbling again in 21:5, right? And the people spoke against Elohim and against Moshe. I was supposed to say that with a nice rabbi accent right there. Again with the grumbling. Right? All right. Okay, so the people spoke against Moshe and against Elohim. Why have you brought us up out of Mitzrayim to die in the wilderness? There is no food, no water. Our being loathes this light bread. At this point, Yahweh sends fiery serpents amongst them, and they bites the people. And many people of Israel died. Then the people came to Moshe and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against Yahweh and against you. Pray to Yahweh and take away these serpents from us. So Moshe prayed on behalf of the people. And so it sounds like they got struck for the bread, right? What's so special about this bread, this manna? And Yahweh said to Moshe, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and it shall be that anyone who is bitten, he looks at it and shall live. So Moshe made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole, and it came to be, if a serpent had bitten anyone's, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. So that doesn't make sense, but that's a faith. That's an act of faith, right? That's not you can't break that down scientifically. This has to do with just faith. Just do what I said because you're my servant, right? And I promise to keep it. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in the King James it says, for there is no bread, neither is there any water, and our soul loathes this light bread.
Yep.
It's like we hate this stuff that you've given us. Really? Wow. It's kept them alive for how many years?
Right. Well, I think it's more deeper. It's deeper than that. But here's the thing. Yeshua said to them, I am the bread of life. The one who comes to me shall not get hungry, and the one who believes in me shall not get thirsty. So the problem with complaining against that bread is that bread was Messiah. He said, I am the bread of life. There's so many times he says, I am this, I am that, I am the other thing. So when you complain against, we may not realize it at the time, but that thing, the provision that Yahweh gave you, that sometimes we grumble against, that we don't like. Sometimes, maybe in 1,000 years, Yeshua might go, I am that thing I gave you, so that you would be sustained and so that you would be set free or whatever, But we might sit there and go, oh, man, I hate this, And Moshe, so also hear about lifting up this serpent, right? And as Moshe lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so the son of Adam has to be lifted up. So this is another idiom for Messiah, right? Now, this serpent on a pole is the idiom is this is Messiah being, I'm going to be lifted up on a pole so that you can look upon me, and I will take death and the curse upon me so that you can live. You can be free, right? You can be free from this curse. I take your curse upon me. So look at this. Okay, so I would have liked to do a little bit more on that one, but there we go. We had a conversation about salvation a little bit earlier, right? Paul was sent to preach salvation. This is our last slide here, I believe. I said, who are you, Master? This is when he gets struck down on the road to Damascus. And then he said, I am Yeshua, whom you persecute. But rise up and stand on your feet, or I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you a servant and a witness both of what you saw and of those which I shall reveal to you, delivering you from people and nations to whom I now send you, to open their eyes, to turn them from darkness to light, and the authority of Satan to Elohim, in order for them to receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among those who are set apart by belief in me. So this was the purpose. This is what he wanted, and this is what Paul's mission was to open their eyes so that they see what the Scripture actually says, which is what we're trying to do, right? Not trying to preach some doctrine. We're trying to show you where Mashiach is throughout all the Scripture, and to turn from darkness to light. So the thing I'd like to clear up is that darkness is not evil, okay? That's a sun god mentality. So the sun is not good and the dark is evil. Yahweh created them both. But a creature who lives in the day, to walk in darkness will stumble. And if you lead others into darkness with you, you can lead them to stumbling as well. So to lead you out of that and into the light, because you were meant to see the light, right? And the biggest thing here is the authority of Satan to Elohim. So in the wilderness, the people or in Mitzrayim, the people served Pharaoh. And in the wilderness, they served Yahweh. That is salvation. You are saved because you were saved from a cruel master and delivered to a righteous master. But he has rules, right? And you got to follow the rules so that you can get the inheritance.
Amen.
Right? If you don't follow the rules, you end up dying in the wilderness. You make it that far, but you won't make it into the promised land. Right? And if you grumble in the wilderness, you do a 40-year journey. Right? We don't want to do the 40-year journey. So it should have only taken 3 weeks to get to Canaan, not 40 years. They went around that mountain 40 years, not 3 weeks. Huh?
It's a big detour.
It was a huge detour. All right. Yes, brother.
Did you see, like I saw in today's Parasha, with the cleansing on the third and the seventh day? The depiction of Yahshua was there. Yahshua on the third day, when he comes back, he's come back on institute that seventh Sabbath day.
Yeah, he instituted this method of cleansing, and then on that day to enter into the rest. And where do you go on Shabbat, or where do you go on a high holy day? Right? You go to Jerusalem, and you celebrate the feast. Yeah, you got to be clean to do that, right? Yeah, I saw that.
He also asked her not to touch him.
Oh, Miriam or Magdalene? Mary Magdalene, yes. Because I have not yet gone into the temple. Yes, sir.
Just we went over probably the most common and shared verse.
Yeah.
Everyone loves to nothing before it, nothing after it. That's my get into heaven free card.
Yeah.
And when you continue reading it, well then like, oh well it says now you're gonna condemn. Then you go the rest of the verses and it says that, no, this is how it is. That the light should come into the world, and those who despise the light, they scorn to revel in darkness. They don't want to see the wicked that they do. That there's only one path. There's that illumination. If you shun the light,
yeah,
you're going to be shunned of the truth.
Yeah.
And that's the main problem with, I don't want to just say modern Christianity, but the world. I mean, that's always bothered me before I was a real follower. Was it sporting events? Everyone holding up John 3:16. I was like, what does that have to do with anything that's going on?
Right.
And just going over that today, you have to keep reading Scripture. You can't take one verse and run with it.
Right.
You have to have everything in context.
Right.
And that's how people get the exact opposite.
Right. Yeah.
To piggyback off of what he's saying, right before that in John 3:13, we're told, and no one has gone up into the heaven except he who came down from the heavens, the Son of Man.
Right.
He is the only one, nobody else.
Right.
And when he tells us these things, that these are the things that are often overlooked, because Brother Morgan's right, 3:16 is the most popular Bible verse out there.
Yep.
But three verses before, we're told exactly what is going on, but it's off. Nobody listens.
Yeah. That's true. Lots of questions. I think June and April.
So, Numbers 19 and 4. Again, we have to remember there's mitzvot, Hukat, and Torah.
Yeah.
There's, there sometimes we interchange it, but there's different things.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the red heifer, we can put it in Hebrews, tie it up with Hebrews 13:11 to 14. The high priest hears the blood of the animal into the most holy place as a sin offering, but the bodies are burnt outside the camp. So Yahshua was sent out of the camp.
Mm-hmm.
And in here in 19:3, now we're looking at Eleazar being set up as the next in line for Aaron in 19:3. But the best part here is the 19:6. So looking at this, hopefully we can see Yahshua as well. And the priest shall take cedar wood and a hyssop and a scarlet and cast it in the midst of the burning of the hyssop. So the scarlet is in Matthew 27:28. They strip him and put a scarlet robe on him.
Yep.
And then the hyssop, that's going to be John 19:29. We're in. There's a vinegar. They soak it in
hyssop. Yep.
And then they put a stick of hyssop so they can reach his lips.
Yep.
And according to some writings, the plank, the wood that they use for his filament.
Yeah, and I know that we can't nail that down 100%, but it makes sense, right? All the implements are there.
All the implements of his
Yeah.
sacrifice are written in Numbers 19.
Yep. Yeah, and I saw that too. I was looking at it and I was like, there's so much to go here. There's so many. There's a picture here and here and here and here, and I could go down that trail. But
and the final thing is, it is a sin to enter the temple in a state of contamination. That's why there's cleansing needed. So us entering into a relationship with Him, there should always be cleansing.
Yes.
Because He's gonna vomit you out.
Yes.
If you're appearing to His presence, His the vicinity, even just within His vicinity, you can't appear with Him dirty.
Yeah.
You have to clean up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What?
So in Numbers 21, I saw this, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but tell me. That they asked for victory over their enemies, right? In verse 21, they're getting ready with the Amorites.
Yes.
Siphon, and they're asking for that victory, and they say, if you do this, then we will do this, and they kind of made an agreement with Yahweh,
Yes.
and He intercedes on their behalf, but then they start to grumble. And so He says, okay, so now I'm going to send these fiery serpents. So later on in the verse, He sent the fiery serpents, and people died because of these fiery serpents. He is, I think, challenging them to conquer their fear by putting the Pushim, the fiery serpent, on the pole and making them face their fears before He goes out as Yahweh of hosts to go battle against the giants after Siphon. He's like building them up one step at a time. He says, okay, if you get this far, face your fear. Look at the serpent, you'll be healed. If you just trust me to do what I'm telling you, then we can have victory. Because they've been trying to overcome these enemies for how long now?
Yeah.
These people have been nipping at their heels for how long now? They haven't conquered any giants up until this point. They tried to go out on their own, and Yahweh left. He departed because they broke the rules.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't go when He said go. They had the 2 spies that had the good report and the 10 that had the bad. So this is like a redemptive course, I think, is, okay, if you trust me now, look at the serpent. Let's start there. Next, let's go ahead. We'll go out against Sihon. Next, we'll go to Og. Og was like the big, bad, huge dude. And so after that, now we're ready. Now we're ready to start putting our foot forward and listening and trusting that if you gaze upon me, you stop putting your eyes in other places. You can fix your eyes on Yeshua. You can fix your eyes on who's going to overcome instead of all the fears you have wrapped up inside of what's against me. How big does it look? Let's close our eyes and stop looking that way and start looking at Yahweh, looking at Yeshua and what He's already done so far up to this point. Like all fears to rest. So it was like a challenge. It was like He was like trying to rev them up to a challenge.
Yeah. Well, and there's also the all of the nations around, because it says what happened was the reason they grumbled was because they grew impatient.
Yeah.
And so they go up to Edom, right? And they're like, hey, let us come through. Surely they'll let us go through, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we're not going to let you come through. You know, I'm picturing, you hear the words, you shall not pass. I'm picturing like Gandalf. Yeah. So, and not that that's a good, I'm not saying it's a good movie because it's got that sorcery in there, but still, He won't let them pass. And so they're like, man, it's just right there. Like 2 days, we'll be there, right? And so they're getting frustrated. They're thinking their journey's almost over. But then He's like, nah, gotta take a little bit more. We got this other, we're going to talk about him next week. We got this other thing you're going to have to go through. We got this Balak and all them that you're going to have to start dealing with.
When I see Peter, with Yeshua.
Yeah.
Or he's looking everywhere else except for at Yeshua. Just like He's like, your gaze is wrong. Your focus is wrong.
Yeah. I saw Stan, and I see Lana, and I see June. Oh, Marissa.
Whoa.
Oh, Marissa. I know yours was up.
And I saw June and Sean. That's all I saw.
The only one I saw was Stan because I was looking over this way. So. All right.
Our English language doesn't use the word.
Right.
Even John 3:16. I mean, believe is different than believe on Adonai Yahshua HaMashiach. That believe on means believe everything.
Right.
Try our best. Follow.
Right. Right.
So much deeper.
Right. In Hebrew, there's a couple words for it. We got one word that typically is translated straight into faith, which is imunah. That means like belief. But there's another word called bitachon, which is like trust and assurance. That's like laying everything down. I trust in everything you say. I'm just going to cover my eyes and I'm going to let you take me where you take me. I have absolute, like a little child, right, to their parents. I don't know where we're going. Oh, we're going to the park. Awesome. You know what I mean? You have no idea.
If I believe versus I know.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know who's next. Marissa? Okay, I know he wants to go.
So good?
June.
Okay, Numbers 20. There's a lot in Numbers 20.
Oh, yeah.
The rock, we know who's the rock.
Yes.
But remember, in the previous Torah portion, 20 years old and above were promised not to get in the land because of their, because they're afraid of the giants.
Yes.
Their unbelief.
Unbelief and afraid of the giants, because we're not going to conquer. But only Caleb and Joshua were promised, and the people below 20 are promised that you will inherit the promised land. And in Numbers 20, we know that here in 2012, this is the reason why.
Oh, because he struck the rock, yeah.
And Edom refused to give Israel passage. Now the question is, who is Edom?
Esau, brother
that's
Esau.
The one that
Uncle Esau.
Yeah, that's the one that took the red soup.
Yeah.
Right?
The lentils, yeah.
Yeah, the red soup is this guy. And he was, in the previous book, they met, right? Jacob met him really afraid.
Oh, yeah.
He was afraid, but then they reconciled. And then this Edom guy said, "Come on, you go with me. Right. You're reconciled." And I think Jacob did the right thing not to go with his brother Esau. Right.
Yeah.
Because here, no, we're not going to allow you to at least just pass in our territory. But remember, Aharon died on the first day of the 5th month. 3 weeks from now, that will be the anniversary.
Yeah, and a lot of things happened, right? It's the month of Av, right? And they say that the temple was destroyed both times on the 9th of Av, right? So, and that's all in the time he died. You brought something else up, and I was going to talk about it. Remember? Oh, okay.
Going back to the red just for a little bit.
Making the rock.
So unusual because there's no other sacrifice like this sacrifice.
Right.
It is a whole everything, blood, everything is in this sacrifice.
Right.
And if you have a part in doing the sacrifice, you're now unclean. But yet you have to have the sacrifice to then be.
Yeah.
So it seems so contradictory that no other sacrifice does that. Because the priests, when they do the sacrifices, it doesn't say that they're unclean.
Well, it says a man who does the cleansing, who touches the water for cleansing, he's unclean until the evening.
And then, yeah, right, he's unclean.
Yeah.
So it's amazing, contradictory, but it's not.
Yeah.
Because we need to think about what's holy and what's not holy, and you're not supposed to touch something holy, but you have to do something that's holy to be able to be holy.
Yeah. Well,
it's Yahweh's economy. It's not our economy, so it doesn't seem logical to us, but it's completely logical to them.
Well,
I think Yeshua says about like the show bread. If one slice is holy,
the lump, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the lump. Yeah, you're right. Oh goodness.
Just so much.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Yeah. Well, somebody's got to do the dirty work. Like when somebody dies, for instance, most likely, because back in the day, they were tight-knit families, right? It wasn't like, oh, I'm this old now, I'm leaving mom and dad, I'm going to go work, and then when you get too old to be taking care of them, throwing you in a nursing home, you didn't leave your parents. You didn't leave them until they died, and then the firstborn blessing got passed down, right? And the firstborn was supposed to take the place of the father, and the father, right? And so he basically became the father of the family at that time. But so more than likely, when your mom and dad or your great uncle or whoever you cared about died, you were together, and it's like, well, you're going to take care of that person. You're going to defile yourself for him, right? This says and when Aaron, the high priest, he was not allowed to be defiled for anybody, right? But the priests, they could be defiled for a virgin sister, or
I think parents too, right?
Our parents, I think, one of them. And then anybody else could be defiled for whoever. So the point is there's some groups out there who go around, they're afraid all the time, like, oh my God, I'm going to touch a bug. Oh my God, I can't touch my wife. She's in nidah, right? That's menstruation. Oh my goodness, I can't touch this. I can't touch that, right? That's not the point. The point was that you don't go to the temple in that state.
Right.
That was where you don't go. So if you touch a dead body, that's okay. Don't go to the temple, right? This long. That's why Yahweh says, don't go to the temple for 7 days. On the third day, you get the water from a red heifer. On the seventh day, you go wash yourself and you're clean, right? So those are the stipulations. Okay, I stepped on a bug. Oh, no, maybe I ate one last night and I didn't even know it, right? That kind of thing. So that's where the mercy comes in. It's not everywhere you go, because we see certain sects of Judaism where they have like separate beds for their. It's like I Love Lucy. They got a separate bed. A guy won't touch his wife. She's on the other side of the table. Won't receive anything from her. Nothing like that. Okay, that's not the case. If he's not going to the temple, don't worry about it, right? It's only for the temple purposes. So, nothing to be afraid of. Real quick, I wanted to make a comment about the striking the rock. The first time the rock was struck, well, if the rock is Yeshua was meant to be struck the first time. But in Revelation, it talks about that when the Messiah comes, that the armies will gather against him, right? It's kind of like when they tried to strike him, when Moshe tried to strike him twice. They weren't supposed to strike him that time. He's the one that does all the striking. So it's kind of an interesting, maybe second coming kind of imagery there.
Rather than a sword of his mouth.
Yeah.
So there's something with his words.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to speak to the rock the second time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The rock's going to do the talking this time. Oh. Sorry.
I was just thinking about what you were saying earlier. I forgot his name.
Morgan.
So like, we were coming into Torah. One of the big things with us was getting rid of the pagan holidays.
Amen.
It's probably for the majority of people. And one, Halloween, I was trying to tell some brothers how I felt we used to go to like a small Bible study. And they were trying to justify why Halloween was okay if you incorporated some Christianity. And I said, what does God's word say? Well, don't mix, but God even warned me, Israelites, do not worship me how the Gentiles worship me. And I told them, I said,
Deuteronomy 12.
God wants you to worship His way, not how you want to worship. And they all, after that, there wasn't a single word after that. But yet, they still went ahead and celebrate Halloween. So it's kind of like what you were saying. It's people want to stay double-minded. They want to stay in the world. They want to stay in a little bit of darkness. And they don't care about Torah or what God really wants.
Well, they feared, remember, and it said in our reading today that they feared the Pharisees, right? So I kind of see that. They believed on him, but they feared the Pharisees, so they didn't change. So there's probably a lot of that going on. I know what you're saying is right, but we're going to upset everybody if we do that.
Well, it's like, then we had an instance where they wanted to celebrate Easter at a park. And to my wife, we are not participating in any kind of like egg hunt or anything. And it definitely, we could sense kind of upset them, but I'm like, make a stand.
Be his name.
And it's like, because we're hoping to again influence them to where they want to know more about Torah and what Yahweh really wants.
Yeah.
Not to be like the pagans.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, please don't get discouraged it falls on deaf ears. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Be grateful. It's kind of like what's his name? The king who turned against the wall, right? He was dying, right? I can't remember his name, Josiah or Hezekiah. Hezekiah, right? And he goes and he showed all the riches to Babylon. And Isaiah comes to him and goes, "What did you show him?" I showed him everything. He says, "They're going to come and they're going to take everything from you." And he goes, "But it won't be until after you die." And he goes, "Well, at least there's peace and truth in my days." Right? So it's kind of like, you know what? At least Yahweh showed me the Torah. Because he could have just... He could have showed nobody, right? Everybody could be cursed to not know his truth. So the blessing is that, well, I don't know why you chose me, but I am so grateful you did. Thank you, Father. You know. So whoever's.
I was just going to say that all these stories in here are really good lessons for us. We don't understand how deep they are. You know, we have a fear man. It's a real fear.
Yeah.
But these people had a fear over losing their lives.
Yeah.
That's a really almost whether it takes someone else's life before you love yours. But the Father was telling them to trust in Him and go into that land. Now there was one battle, I can't remember which one it was, but they actually donated all of it to the Levites because not one man died in this battle. It was a great battle. But you know, in most battles, there are some fatalities on both sides. So just because God tells us to go ahead and do something doesn't mean you won't lose your life doing it. And that generation in the wilderness, they were put to the test, not just with being people pleasers, but they had to actually risk their life to serve the Father. We have all been put here in this generation of time, all of us in this room. There's no coincidence.
Right.
We're all here. We're at the end of time. I don't know when it's going to happen, but we cannot fall for the trap of loving our own lives before we love God and what He asked us to do.
Yeah.
None one here is suicidal, but at the same time, those who try to save your life
will lose it.
Will end up losing it.
That's what Yeshua says.
But those of you who are willing to truly believe, I mean the true meaning of believe, to risk everything, to die to self, to follow what God tells us to do. Those are the ones that, unlike that generation who never got to go in the promised land, those who have a true belief in what He asked us to do, we will get to go into.
Amen. And there were past. I think I heard a tale that in Mexico there used to be they had a I guess when the boats would come, there were Jews on the boats trying to flee from Europe, and they'd jump off the boat and go live in those areas, and then they started having like ceremonies every year, and it was a public pork eating ceremony, and what it was designed to do was to draw the Jews out. And so if you wouldn't eat pork, then they would kill you for it. So that was so those things could happen again, right? Yeah. So there could be things like, for vaccinations, for instance. A lot of vaccinations have some unclean stuff in them. Dead fetuses, monkeys, unclean birds, all kinds of stuff there in there, right? Chemicals, hamsters, these kinds of things. They're not. Number one, why does someone have the right to inject something into your blood? And number two, that's unclean. And Yahweh tells you not to even put it in your mouth. So why would you let somebody shoot you up with it, right? So there might be a day when that's coming. It might be coming soon. And so that's going to be I could save my life and I can get injected with this, or I can say, no, my Father says not to do that. So I choose to die instead, right?
We see this time in the Parasha, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the third time in 40 years that the Israelites have been killed, some of them. Mm-hmm. The first time Moshe was coming down, and 3,000 were swallowed up by the earth, right? Immediately. This isn't something you forget, but yet we constantly were hearing this over and over. April touched on it. The constant grumbling. We read it in today's parasha. The constant grumbling. miracle after miracle, after miracle after miracle, they're witnessing with their very own eyes.
Yeah.
And yet, it's still not good enough. It's still not enough.
Right.
We look at that with what Brother Sean was saying. We get very, it's tiresome trying to speak life into people.
Right.
They're grumbling and I don't want to do this. But I was talking to Brother Sean, we're basically asked to do 5 things. Keep the Shabbat, keep his feast, eat clean, wear your seats, and put the mezuzahs on your door. Those are 5 easy things that we can do. But a lot of people wrestle because I don't need somebody telling me what I can eat.
Yep.
Well, if you believe in the Creator, and you believe in his Son, Yahshua, as the Creator of the universe, that tells you what you should eat.
Amen.
And we're seeing what the ramifications are.
He should know.
Eating that way.
Right.
You know, we look at just our own nation of the United States. We're probably one of the most obese nations in the country, and I'm subject to that myself. But these are habits that we built, that were built when we were in Mithraim.
Yeah.
We weren't raised in this truth.
Yeah.
And these Israelites were raised in this truth, and they've seen these things all the time, yet they grumble. We, as a people, like you're saying, if these truly are the end times, we're not above reproach. We're not above what the disciples went through in their last days, because Yeshua said, I was hated, so will you be hated.
Yes.
So many of the disciples were executed, you know, and we're not above that. So that should be the expectation. And that's going to be the measuring rod if we're doing things right. If people are coming against us and we're being tested as an assembly. I was tested this past week. Asked the brothers in leadership for some reassurance. Offered some free service on my house to her today. And it was a blessing. They're not charging me, but it was servile work. The Bible says don't do that. Don't do any servile work. Do not. Your man, your maidservant, your son, your daughter. Brothers reassured me of this. And with that obedience, the Father made another way. To where tomorrow the work can be done. Where when I asked for it the first time, it wasn't. So these are the tests that we go through, and it doesn't matter how long we're in the truth. We're going to be tested.
Yep.
And we should expect these tests over and over and over again.
Yep.
So us staying in here and looking at the Israelites, some of them died. They perished because of their unbelief, because of their disobedience, because of their rebellious spirit.
Right.
We're not above them.
Right.
They've got to see a lot of miracles that we have yet to see with our eyes, but God willing, we will be witness to miracles here come.
I pray. I see us as exactly like them, actually. We're dispersed. We haven't inherited the promise. Okay? We were seeking the promise. We want the promise. So, and that's what they were waiting for. They were in Egypt awaiting a deliverer, right? The deliverer came, took them out, and they're like, wait a minute. This deliverance kind of sucks. You know what I mean? And that's not what I expected. And I think that's the problem. And I think that's kind of the danger when we hear a lot of pastors and whatnot. You start talking about like, well, what do you think that happened in Revelation? What do you think it's going to be like? What do you think this is going to happen? By saying, well, it's going to be like this and it's going to be like the other thing and whatnot, sometimes it may not go that way. What he said a lot of time is a parable or an idiom, and it may not be the way you think. So if you get your mind locked on it and go, nope, it's got to be just like this. It's got to be just like this. And when the deliverer comes, you might miss him, right? Okay.
So tailcoating that is kind of right into it. I see a brother rejected by other brothers throughout all of Scripture. It's like this repetitive cycle. Like Abel was rejected by Cain.
Yep.
You see Jacob rejected by Esau. You see Moshe now being rejected by his people because he was raised as an Egyptian.
Yep.
And it brought me back to Zaphanath with Joseph. He was rejected by his brothers. He was sold into slavery. He was unrecognizable. And in that,
he looked Egyptian.
He became Egyptian. He looked Egyptian, and everybody came to him when it was time for help. You see Jephthah. Jephthah was rejected by his brothers in our HafTorah, right? They didn't come to him until they needed his help. Because now he is to be the savior, and just like Zaphanath, the brothers came back seeking assistance, and at that time, they didn't see their brother. They saw somebody who was going to save them. Just like we saw Jesus as somebody who was going to save us. But did we know him then? Not as Christians we didn't.
Right.
Really. We didn't know his lineage. We didn't know him as the true Messiah. And so just like Moshe, did they really know Moshe? They only wanted Moshe when he was their savior. So as a savior of the nation of Israel, now the trust is being tried and tested over and over and over again. It's just our daily trial is to trust that our Savior knows better, and he met us where we were at. He met the Egyptians or the Israelites in Egypt, in Goshen, where they were. But he says, don't stay there. I'm going to give you salvation, but don't stay here. Keep trusting me. Keep following me. I'll lead you out. And just like with Jephthah, he says, if I'm going to save you and conquer the enemies, it's not by my strength, but it's by Yahweh's hand. That means you're going to follow me from this point forward. You trust that if Yahweh's giving me the strength to save you, that now you're going to follow me. And following somebody you don't know is difficult. And just like we have a hard time following Yeshua, it's the same repetitive cycle.
Yeah.
Trusting somebody you don't understand.
Yeah.
Well, going back to what
Mike?
Talking about, no one has ascended to the Father, to heaven yet. We just finished watching maybe months ago on 119 the death series, and it totally changed our perspective on death now.
Yeah.
Because again, pastors will always say, "Well, as soon as you die, you're with Jesus. As soon as you die, you're in heaven." It's like, no, you're not.
That's not what the scripture says.
That's what the scripture said. But again, did I believe that for a long time?
Right.
You know, it's just so wonderful when you read the word, and it just lightens up now, even more so.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole thing with Sheol and everything like that's totally different than what.
I think they did a pretty good job. I don't think I've seen it, but
I like 119 Ministries. Those guys are pretty solid on most stuff.
It's like a 7-part series about death and life, and like where we go after we die, whether you're a believer, unbeliever, the resurrection. And I've never heard any of that teaching in any church.
Yeah. Cool.
And also, real quick, what you were saying, it reminds me of, I've told other Christians, like, when Yeshua comes back for his bride, the bride doesn't look like him.
Right.
I mean, what do you think's going to happen? If part of you are still doing Christmas and eating unclean and, on and on, I mean, that's not the bride of Yeshua.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
workers of iniquity.
Lawlessness.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Which is exactly what I was going to talk about. So I'm just piggyback on what all been said, but he said, and when he came down from the mountain, they were claiming to worship Yahweh with this golden calf, but it was a different Yahweh, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was one apparently that seemed to ignore the commandments, right? And Paul also warns in Galatians about another Yeshua.
Yes.
So which Yeshua, how do we distinguish between the two? Because he makes it clear that the person whom you obey, you are his servant. He who you serve, that's the one. That
if you love me, keep my command.
Right. Mm-hmm. So if you're worshiping some other God that has different commandments, that's what the whole idea of that lawlessness, or the word anomia, which some translations say iniquity, it kind of obscures the meaning, but it's true. You're saying lawlessness is you're obeying somebody else's law. Typically, it's our own law. That's what appeals to me, and that's what the whole concept of eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is. Well, I want to decide for myself what's right and wrong. And so, if I gotta serve myself, well, that's Shaitan all over again. If I want to serve Yeshua, the way I know I'm serving him and not a false Yeshua is I'm not doing lawlessness. I'm not going to be one of the ones who he says, "Depart from me, you worker of lawlessness. I never knew you." So how is it that we know him? Old Testament and New Testament. All of it. We're walking with him on the straight and narrow path. We're walking with him hand in hand. He says, I do not know the way of the wicked. I don't know their way. He says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." I'm thinking, okay, this is a relationship here. And in relationships, there are rules, like it or not. I've used the example many times. My wife
we have certain things that are expectations. And if I mistreat her, well, I'm not following the guidelines. I'm stepping over a boundary, which is what John says is transgression of the law. That's the boundary line we're talking about here. One Yeshua teaches the commandments, another one teaches lawlessness. So that's how we know.
Well, and knowing is an intimate connection, where it says he knew his wife, that's as intimate as it gets.
Yeah.
And so you can know about somebody, but to know them requires intimacy.
You know,
I
and
got running over a couple of times.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I just wanna talk about the rock being struck twice.
Mhm.
Because Abba Yahweh is so detailed.
Mm-hmm.
He told Moses, speak to the rock.
Yes.
And so what made that me thinking is that we have to be, we cannot be complacent in obedience, in our obedience with him.
Yeah.
If he says that, that's what we should do.
Amen.
We cannot assume, just like Moses, he commanded him first to strike the rock at Mount Horeb, right?
Yeah.
But this time in Meribah, just speak to the rock. We cannot assume that because he said that this time this is what we're gonna do that, because what he tells us this time, that's what we're supposed to obey. We have to be obedient 100%.
Yes.
Because according to here, bring the staff and talk to the rock. We have to be really, because some of us are being complacent with following his orders. And so right here, he already provided water, right? After a chapter after, they complained, we don't have water. He just provided water, but they said, we don't have water. We don't have food. And the food we have is detestable, which made me think that being not content with his blessings will bring us into trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is that song Dayenu, right? Right. It is sufficient. It is sufficient, right? If you had only given us the Torah, it would have been sufficient, right? Oh,
no, go ahead.
So just backing up on brother Michael's different issue.
Mm-hmm.
There is a different issue.
Yeah.
That came with the letter J.
Mm-hmm.
Let's read it in John 5. John 5:42. But I know you that ye have not the love of God. And 43. I am come in my Father's name, and you receive me not.
Mm-hmm.
If another shall come in his own name, him ye shall receive.
Right. Another Yeshua, right?
That's another issue.
Yeah.
Well, I was raised in Mormonism. They have a totally different Jesus.
Oh yeah. Muslims got one too.
You're totally on right there.
The brother of Satan. Brother. They say Jesus is brother of Satan.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yes, big brother.
Yeah. I was gonna say real quick. What was interesting to me when I was coming into more understanding and wisdom, I couldn't figure out why Orthodox Jews were so hard to witness. And to see that Yeshua is the Messiah. You know, you could reference Isaiah, servant, prophecy. And then I think I seen 119 where they were like, because they think he's a false prophet. Why? Because they see Christians, again, Christmas, all the other pagan stuff. So what are they doing? They're applying the Deuteronomy 13 test, right? So they think that he was a false prophet because of what they see of Christianity. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense.
It's true, and they did the same thing to Paul, right?
Yeah.
Remember Paul? They accused him of preaching against the temple and preaching against the Torah. And what did they say to him? Well, prove it. Go pay for these men who have a Nazarite vow to be to pay for their sacrifices and the shaving of their heads, right? And so that was the proof, and that's what kicked everything off, right?
And by their sacrifice. He was actually making a sacrifice.
He was making the sacrifice in the temple years after Mashiach had ascended. So they were still doing the sacrifices. They were still going. He's like, and then what did he say? Like when he was out on his journeys, I have to go to Jerusalem for the feast of the Jews, right? I got to go back. They were still doing it, right? So to say all these things are done away with is like, wow, that's been 20 years, 20-something years, you know.
See, a lot of people quote Paul a lot, but forget who is their salvation.
Right.
Who are they claiming as their Savior? But they're promoting Paul's word,
yes,
and not their Savior's very own words.
Right.
So when we dissect that and we're talking to people, if you're a Paul follower, fine, be a Paul follower, that's cool. But Paul's not your Messiah. He's not your Hamashiach. He's not your salvation.
Right.
Who is? If it's Yahshua, that God is salvation, then we better start listening more to what they're saying than Paul. Because Peter, like we know for a long time, Peter gave us the warning that Paul is hard to understand, and
they twist.
Untested will twist his scriptures to their own destruction. Paul's letters weren't given, and I think you expressed this to me the other day, brother, that they weren't given to the layperson. They were given to the leaders of an assembly. The layperson would have never had access to this because they did not have the understanding.
Yeah.
So, falling on the words of Messiah, falling on the words of Yahweh, first and foremost. If anything else even appears to be coming against that, we're told to reject it.
Yeah.
And even if it is Paul, it's canonized, but if it's coming against what Yahweh says and what Yeshua reaffirmed, we have to step away from it.
I believe that's why a lot of assemblies like to use the whole King James only doctrine, because we don't speak that anymore. And so a lot of it causes, so it's easy when you read all the these and thous and weird words, and guess what? The word let in certain situations means the opposite. It means to hinder. So if you don't know all these things going in, then the preacher can get up there and say whatever he wants to you and say, see, it says here in Acts chapter 12, Easter, that's good enough for me. I've heard that said directly, you know what I mean? Even though if you strip away the King's English, it says, the Pesach underneath there, right? So keep the Pesach is what it says. So, and Paul, and to quote Paul over and over again, since he's hard to understand because he's talking at a level that the new person to the faith is just not going to get. Huh?
That I am an imitator of
Yeshua.
I'm an imitator of Yeshua. Go look at Yeshua. Don't look at me. Go look at Yeshua.
Theology of what Paul says.
Yes.
Not what he actually says.
Yeah, and he came to destroy things that we don't have understanding of. A lot of times when we hear this stuff, works of the law, it's only been revealed in the last 100 years that there's actually a document called Works of the Law floating around back in his day that had nothing to do with the actual Torah.
Rabbinic edition.
There's rabbinic edition, and it says right at the end of it, if you do these things, you'll be justified. But that's why he kept saying, you will not be justified by works of the law, but by faith, right? That's why he keeps hammering that, but it confuses people.
Oh, yeah.
I love what Stan said about that the Torah was our trainer, right, our educator. And that you had said before is that I don't speak in parables or riddles to Moshe.
Yeah.
And so those first 5 books are our training. And if we don't start there and we jump ahead to the end of the book, it's like me trying to teach my little ones how to do calculus and they don't even know what numbers are. They're going to be throwing up their hands saying, I can't do this, and they're going to feel like that yoke and that burden is so heavy on them because they haven't taken the proper steps. Because he says that the milk is for babies and that the meat is for adults. He's separating, not to condescend anybody, but you got to start here. You got to start with Torah to understand really what are the prophets, what are the writings, what's Brit HaDasha all about, because there should be no contradiction or confusion.
They should always line up.
It's consistent. All of Scripture is consistent. And if there's a confusion, it's really a confusion in us that we have to iron out and get to the bottom of, because there's so many translation errors. Not that it was written wrong, but the way that it was translated from Hebrew to English, we lose the meaning, we lose the idioms, the culture, because we didn't live 4,000 years ago. So what are they talking about when there are Hebrew jokes, there are Hebrew idioms, they're slang, and we don't get it because, even if you go to Texas, in this country, if you go to Texas and they talk about, washing the dishes, there's just
washing the dishes.
There's things that we would not understand, like, well, you got your doodad and your thingamajigers up there and the countertops, we're going to be like, and that's in this country at this time. So just kind of take it with a grain of salt. Go back to Torah where it's plain.
So you mean there. Hebrew memes?
Hebrew memes. Hebrew memes. I like it. That's great.
Is it?
Yeah. I was just going to say also in Galatians, which seems to be the favorite book of the dispensationalists. Yeah. But he says there's also another gospel, which is gospel, just the word evangelion, good news. What's the good news? Hey, talks about that in Isaiah, the good news, right? So there's good news. We can be reconciled with our Creator. We can be washed, clean, redeemed, made holy to be able to enter into the kingdom, his land, right? So, well, being that there's another gospel, he says, if I come and I preach another Messiah or another gospel, he makes firm in there. He says, my gospel is the same that Christ or Messiah taught.
Right.
So what is that gospel? I mean, he's talking about repentance. He's talking about obeying the law all the way through. So you do have to sift through Paul a little bit, but he comes through. It's just that he's more complex. So you read very clear expressions like Romans 3:31 and Romans 6:1, and he's saying, no, obey the law.
Yeah.
Obey the law. God forbid we should obey the law. So you can say, okay, it's clear, but it should be clear, but it's not so much. He's complex. The lens that we look at everything he says through is what he said we should compare it to. That is, Yeshua is the clear expression in the flesh, walking amongst them. What does it look like to keep the law?
Right.
That's our test. Test everything.
That whole festival was good, yeah. On piggybacking off what you said was I think the reason that he's hard to understand is because you get in half the argument a lot of times.
Right.
So when you got a letter to the Colossae, they had sent a complaint to him. Hey, you started this place. We're having this issue. What should we do about it? You don't got that part. It's not there. You only got his part, and you don't have any other. We maybe have one more letter, but maybe he wrote 5 letters to him. We don't have the other, the other 3 or whatever. Yeah.
2 Corinthians are actually 3rd and 4th Corinthians actually before that.
Yeah.
So.
And the things that we also don't understand too is that we have groups of people like Gnostics. I mean, we have forms of that today, but there were specific things, like the worship of angels. And when he'll say these things, and he'll say, he'll blurt them out, and he's coming against these theologies, which were more clear back then. They would have known exactly who he's talking about. But you're like, what are you talking about, worshiping angels? That kind of stuff where it doesn't. Yeah. So there's and then there is things where they're like, oh, people who preach the works of the law, and he'll say something about it, but if you don't know that was there, it's like one of the things I was thinking about, or the circumcision, right? You hear, oh, what profit is circumcision versus uncircumcision? It's like, see, you shouldn't circumcise. Don't realize that that's an idiom for a certain sect of Judaism, and it's one of the things that I always like to bring up is there was a couple bands in like the 80s and 90s, like The Cure and The Cult, right? And then it's like he said, don't listen to The Cure, right? And 1,000 years later, you're like, oh, see, he says not to go to doctors, right? Because you don't know who The Cure is, right? You know what I mean? And it's a band from like the 80s and 90s, you know what I mean? Or the
I'm feeling kind of gay today. Sorry. Oh, different meanings, all right. Oh, cheerful, that's all.
So I just want to follow through with what Michael said about following Yeshua, and that Yeshua was a perfect example of obeying the law. Mm-hmm. And so I think we really have to really pay attention to it, because if Moses just for one thing that he did not do, he wasn't able to enter the promised land. If we are not going to follow what Yeshua did, in following the law, it could be the reason for us also not to be able to go into his kingdom in the future.
Right.
So.
Brian and I were talking about this earlier. Names have meanings, and Moshe's name needs to draw out, and that was his mission. He drew the children of Israel out of Mitzrayim, right? And so I'd heard before in different preachings that they said that Moshe's job was never to bring them into Israel. And Yahushua was supposed to bring, he's the Savior. So Yahshua, the Savior of Yahweh, was the one who saved the church. He brought them in, saved them from their enemies. He was obedient, right? When they would mess up, he was the one who would fall before the ark and cry out, you know what I mean? So his name meant to save, you know. And then when he stood before the man, the thing that dawned on me is that when he stood before the man with the sword drawn, and he says, "Are you for us or are you for our enemies?" And he goes, "No, but I am the leader of Yahweh's armies," right? And he falls on his face, he takes off his shoes, he worships him, right? It's Yeshua facing Yeshua at that time, right? Yeshua in his glorified form or his angelic form is facing Yeshua, the chief of the tribes of Israel right now. It's a mirror happening right there between heaven and the earthly realm, and he had to do it. Yeshua had to lead them in, or Yahshua had to lead them in, because he's a picture of the Yeshua that is going to lead us in. Yeah.
I'll let that go to me in a second.
Okay.
I was just going to piggyback on what you said about a lamb and everything. You know, it's just in about the red heifer. If you didn't go through that cleansing, you were cut off.
Yeah.
You were killed.
Yeah.
That's it. You didn't have a choice. It seems like a small thing. Well, I just didn't go get sprinkled. No big deal. And I didn't wash my garment. It is a big deal.
Yeah.
Everything's a big deal. You know, we might not completely understand. Like I said, the red heifer is kind of a different thing. But it doesn't matter. This is what he says we have to do. Obedience.
Amen.
Obedience is more important to him than sacrifice. Obedience, obedience,
Yes.
obedience.
Amen.
Then what also happens is people try to add to or take away from God's Torah, and that's, you can't do that either.
Larry's had his hand up, so I'm going to let him go now. I'm sorry,
Well,
Larry.
I think about Moses, and I think about disobedience, but I also think about his biggest problem, I think, was anger.
Yes.
And that anger is sin. And then I think about all the prophets that they also sin.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of girl, are they do that?
Yeah.
Which takes away being in the holy land.
Yeah.
How kind of something that I have thought to do.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah, he killed the Egyptian, right? That's what kicked everything off. He killed the Egyptian, and that got him booted out of it. Out of Egypt. Yeah.
That real river, and Proverbs was anger. You control your anger. It's the equivalent of running an entire city.
He who
That's how hard it is. Anger is, and you control your anger.
he who conquers his heart is greater than one who conquers a city. That one.
You were talking about Hebrew idioms and jokes and whatnot earlier. Put it into a context that we may understand a little bit easier today. Text messaging. How many times have we misinterpreted something that somebody's texted? You know, oh, you're yelling at me. No, that's not how it is. It's just black and white letters. I wasn't yelling. But it's how they receive that message.
Yeah.
There's that miscommunication, misinterpretation, and sometimes that can cause division.
Yeah.
You could be like, if I felt offended by a text message you sent, you know, now I would come to you and say, hey, what's up, brother? But
give me a call.
The passive-aggressive me would be like, well, Nick's really irritated with me, so I guess I won't talk to him for a month or two, or whatever it is. You know, it's that misinterpretation and misunderstanding. So when the scriptures were written, try to put the context in where they were at the time. You know, Paul is a prime example. Yeshua's time, that's the most recent thing that we have, around 2,000 years ago. It's much harder to understand, like what Moshe and Aharon were doing. We have bits and pieces of the story, but we don't have that emotional connection.
Yeah, all the details.
Of how they were, because they were brothers.
Right.
They were brothers and had a sister as well. We don't get to see that.
Yeah.
But here we get to, we're more emotional, bonded people, and we feed off of one another's emotions, and they're impacted that way. And we can easily misinterpret something. Like me, I have a very loud voice, and Michael's aggressive, I can't talk to him. That's not exactly how it is. I just
should have been a singer. I
I'll stop using all
think it's you and Jason.
Well, just piggybacking on what you said, Nick, and that is with Yeshua and Joshua, the name is exactly the same name.
Yeah.
And when you look at the patterns, it's just, I would love to do a full study on that. I know I say that about every topic we talk about, but it's interesting because there will be a second Exodus.
Yeah.
So, and who's leading that?
Yeah.
Who's leading
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
He's, so you look at all of this stuff, and why was Moses not the leader taking people over the Jordan River into the Promised Land? It was the man with the name Yeshua.
Yeah.
Yahushua.
Yeah.
The same name. I mean, and it's just fascinating that the front of the book matches the back of the book, and I don't know, it's just really cool. And looking at all of this, it's overwhelming though. It's mind-numbing at how much all of this stuff crosses over from the front to the back.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But there's a wise man I know who says that that the theology is deep enough or shallow enough for a child to wade in, but deep enough for a theologian to drown in. So.
Yeah, that must have been amazing when Joshua was standing there going, "Are you for us or against us?" And he was like,
No.
Because he knows that this is supernatural.
Yeah.
This is a supernatural being, and
He took off his shoes and he worshipped.
Yeah,
and it wasn't rejected.
He was not told, "Don't worship me."
Right.
So that's implying that yes, he deserved to be worshipped.
Yes. Yeah. Wait.
Just with a lot of the what we've been talking about in here, it just reminds me of 1 Corinthians 10. I mean, I'm just going to read a little bit of it,
Cool.
Maybe half a minute or so. For I do not wish you to be ignorant, brothers, that all of our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were immersed in the Moshe in the cloud and the sea. And all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed. And the rock was Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
However, with most of them, Elohim was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. And these became examples for us, so that we should not lust after evil, as those indeed lusted, and do not become idolaters, as some of them.
Mm-hmm.
As it has been written, the people sat down to eat and to drink and stood up to play. Neither should we commit whoring, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 fell. Neither let us try Messiah, as some of them also tried, and were destroyed by serpents.
Yep.
Neither grumble, as some of them also grumbled, and were destroyed by the destroyer. And all these things came upon them as examples, and they were written as a warning to us, on whom the ends of the ages have come, so that he who thinks he stands, let him take heed, lest he fall. No trial has overtaken you except such as is common to man. And Elohim is trustworthy, who shall not allow you to be tried beyond what you are able.
Amen.
But with a trial shall also make the way of escape, enabling you to bear it. Therefore, my beloved ones, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men, judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless is not a sharing in the blood of Messiah, or is it not a sharing in the blood of Messiah? The bread that we break, is it not a sharing in the body of Messiah? Because there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake in one bread.
Where was that?
That was 1 Corinthians 10, 1 through...
Yeah, and all those that you brought up, they were actually called out directly in the Torah. Like when they lusted for the meat, right? Or when they whored, that's coming up next Parasha, right? When they whored with the women of Moab, right? And grumbling, they grumbled everywhere. The serpents, right? That was in this Parasha, right? So, I mean, that fit really well, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's awesome. Also, too, take courage that he doesn't give you a trial you can't overcome. And in Leviticus 17, it says, or sorry, the 10:20, it says, "No, but the nations slaughter. What the nations slaughter, they slaughter the demons, and not to Elohim. I do not wish that you become sharers with demons." And then talk about that in Leviticus, how you should only slaughter in the place where Yahweh's name is, and no longer in the field slaughtering the demons, like what the children of Israel did previously. That's why we don't go out in our backyard and start sacrificing goats. You know what I mean? Because he would consider it a slaughtering to demons.
Well, it's hard to believe that Israel actually sacrificed their own kids to Moab. That to me is,
we do it now. We do it here in this country.
well, abortion.
Yeah, they abort the babies and they burn them in a furnace. You know.
Worse.
Or we're like.
We don't have to get into it. There's some pretty bad stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Put them in vaccines.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
It's like Soylent Green. That's what they're doing. They inject it. Anyways. All right. So you want to end in a prayer and just have general? Yeah? Or does somebody else have something to say? I don't want to skip anybody. No? Okay. Avenu Malkeinu, my Father, my King, I praise you and I thank you. Bless your holy name, Father. Thank you for your Shabbat. Thank you that you've given us the strength to arrive today and hear your words. And I pray that they are pleasing in your sight, Father. Please forgive us for any errors or any corrections, and I pray that you would make them and help us to be humble to receive correction. For no man is perfect, and every man stumbles, Father. We all stumble in something. So I pray that you would help us to overcome that and be obedient to your words, Father. Help our hearts to be moldable in your hands so that you can make a precious vessel for your liking, Father, that'll do your deeds, Father, and that will honor your name, Father. Carry forth your Ruach HaKodesh to the ends of wherever you send us. And I love you, Father, and I praise you. And I pray for your blessing to be all over these people, that your Ruach HaKodesh would be with them to guide them, and that you would be behind them to guide them in the way when their trouble comes, that you'll recall the scripture that tells them what to do, and that they be strengthened to do it. Bless you, Father, and praise you in Yeshua HaMashiach's name. Amen. I'll get Brother June to do Aaronic blessing.
Scripture I just read it actually goes into sacrificing the demons. Exactly.
That's why I grabbed it, because I was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's a blessing.
Amen.
Yevarekeka Yahweh, Vishmarecha, Yahweh Paneleka, Vihunecha, Yisaya Paneleka, Be'asem Lecha, Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh shine his face on you and be gracious to you. May Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach.
Okay, you don't have to leave. Nobody's hang around or go home. Or eat more. We probably saw some. Shut the door.
Oh yeah. Okay. For the red peppers.
Yeah.
I was looking at Hebrew, and they talking about that the sacrificial system is flawed.
Brother Mike. McLeod, or not McLeod, Walker. Hold on, I'll get it. I just wanted to shut this down because it's still screaming. I just want to. Can I just hit exit and stop it?
Hit stop recording and stop streaming.
Is it down here? Stop recording.
Yeah. Stop streaming, stop recording.
Bye, everybody. Love you.